Storey Time with Stephanie Storey.
Hi.
Hi.
This is Story Time, and I am art historical novelist Stephanie Storey. My guest today, I'm very excited about having her here because for me, she writes some of the most accessible, relatable historical fiction I have ever read.
Wow. That's quite a pitch.
It's true. And we've never met in person. We have only sort of run into each other on social media. So this will be the first time we are having any like in-person interaction, although this is not really quite in person. So just to tell you some of her books, Rodin's Lover, Last Christmas in Paris, Meet Me in Monaco. Welcome to the show, Heather Webb.
Thank you. So glad to be here and to meet you finally after seeing you online and hearing so much about you from Crystal King, an author friend of ours. I actually just downloaded Oil and Marble on Audible, so I'm really excited to read it myself.
That makes me nervous, Heather. That makes me nervous. It does.
I'm excited.
I can't wait to see what you think. PJ Auckland, who's the narrator, does a lovely job, I think. I haven't listened to all of it because it scares me, but
I understand. You don't want to hear your own words either and think, oh, I really could have edited that better. You know, I start to think that if I read too much of my own stuff or listen to too much of it. And so I tend to avoid it myself.
Okay, so good. So I'm not the only one who has this, like, I have this weird phobia of listening to the audio reader. Do you hear yourself? So you want to change like the words that are written? Do you also want to change the way it's written, or is it really just self-critique?
I think it's self-critique. And I also think, you know, the emphasis on a certain word or phrase in my head is different from what the voice actor does, and they're professionals at what they do. So you kind of just have to let them do it. But sometimes you're like, oh, I would have emphasized that word or whatever. But I've actually been very pleased with all the narrators so far. We've got really, really lucky. I haven't had one where I just cringe and think, oh, you know, I've had really great narrators. So
have you ever wanted to do it yourself? Have you ever had that itch? Mine have been so far, so I didn't have a, you know, but you read about so many women. Did you ever have that desire?
Never. I just, you know, I think let the professionals do their work. I ended up self-publishing one of my novels, actually, The Phantom's Apprentice. That's a retelling of Phantom of the Opera from Christine Daae's perspective. And I just wanted to see what the process was like. And it's kind of a tricky book to place in a traditional market. So I thought I would go for it. But I hired professional editors and interior book designers, and I hired a professional cover designer because I wasn't about to do any of that stuff myself when I know I'm not a professional at those things. You know, I write the stories. They're the ones who package the books really beautifully. And I'll probably get it recorded in audio as well, and I'm definitely not going to do it myself. So have you been tempted, or is it something you would do if you had a female character? Or
it's men. It's so been outside of any realm of possibility. It's not like I'm going to narrate for Michelangelo, Leonardo, and Raphael. So
right.
I don't know if I had a female character if I would be somewhat tempted. What really interests me about you is you've written about all these different kinds of women through history, right? So female sculptor in Camille Claudel, which you know I love from Rodin's Lover, Grace Kelly and Napoleon's wife, and Christine Daae, women from World War I and the French Revolution. Obviously, there's a common theme that they're women, and obviously there's a lot of French involved, which we'll get to. But aside from those two things, are there things that these women all have like common denominators about their stories that really draws you to the same story, or are you always looking for something different?
I always want to do something different. I mean, I've written a couple of biographical historicals, and then I've written stories that are completely fictional but based, you know, in a well-known time or event. And then I've done a retelling, and then I've done collaborations, and I've done a short story, and all kinds of stuff. So I like the challenge of trying different kinds of writings, and Yeah, and I get bored if I kind of stick to the same thing over and over again, which is a weird thing to say given that writing is so much work and so much hard work, but I don't want to write the same book over and over again. So there are women, I write about women. I love writing male voices as well. You know, I wrote from Rodin's voice in Rodin's Lover as well. And then in the couple of collaborations I've done with Hazel, there are male voices. And I wrote the male voices in Last Christmas in Paris. And actually a book I'm working on now, it's dual perspective as well, a female and a male, and I'm writing them, you know, both. So the thing about women is obviously we have all these stories that were buried in the past. So I like to bring those to light. But a lot of it has to do with the market, to be honest. If I could get away with writing male perspectives more often, I would love to mix it up. There are several male characters I absolutely, that were real people or stories around their lives that I find really fascinating, and I would love to write about them. But I don't know, it's hard to approach your editor with something like that if you haven't written it before. You know, my audience is predominantly female, although, you know, there's some male readers as well. But so that's a big part of it. It's a balance of marketing and what interests me and what's new, what's fresh, what feels fresh to me. So
you've brought up collaborating a couple of times.
Yes.
Already, right out of the gate. But some of the books you write by yourself.
Yes.
Some of the books you have one collaborator.
Yes.
And one book you collaborated with 5 other writers to write the same book, which is Ribbons of Scarlet.
Yes.
You obviously get something out of the collaboration, but you also obviously get something out of the writing alone. What are those different processes like for you?
So, of course, I love writing solo novels because it's you know, they're the stories that I love. It's my book. I get to go in the direction I want to go, and I have my own style. But, you know, I'm an extrovert, actually, in this very introverted field, and I think that I get a lot out of working with other people, and I miss that aspect. I used to be a high school teacher for a decade and a track coach, and I took students to France. I taught high school French. That's where the French thing comes from. So switching from that to becoming a writer, which is mostly solitary, was a huge change. And it was a welcome change on one hand, but on the other hand, I really miss working with people. And so when Hazel and I kind of fell into this idea together, Hazel Gaynor, my collaborator and buddy, we work so well together and we have so much fun coming up with these ideas, and we play on each other's strengths, and we're both very flexible and stay out of each other's way while at the same time sort of meshing. And we didn't know it was going to go that way. We just really lucked out, I think, on that first book together. And it was so much joy that we just, honestly, I barely remember writing that book because it did not feel like work.
And that was Last Christmas in Paris.
That was Last Christmas in Paris. Right? Yeah. So, which became a bestseller and won an award. So it was one of those things where we're going to do this again. And so we did. And we're now working on our 3rd collaboration, and it's due, in a few weeks, and we have a long way to go. So the pandemic has slowed us down a bit, as you might imagine.
Okay. So I was going to wait and ask about that, but I'll go ahead and do it. How is the pandemic treating you creatively? Like, are you able to keep working at the level you are? I know that there's a lot of back and forth. I've seen a lot of people on social saying, I can't focus. I can't do it. You're on deadline. Maybe that helps. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, you know, I'm actually on 2 deadlines. I have a book due with Hazel in May, and then I have a book due on my own December 1st. And I'm probably going to need an extension, probably for both. With the collaboration, just a few weeks maybe, but that other one I'm going to need a few months, I think. It has really changed things. It was really disruptive. Initially, I'd say the first 3 weeks were really bad. I could not focus. You're seeing this horrible news. You're seeing the numbers rise. And I was waiting for that, you know, watching it come across the ocean and come towards us. And I was just waiting. What are we going to do? What are they going to shut down? So when it actually happened, after we got used to it a little bit and created a routine, things have been a lot better, but I have had to completely change my schedule. So I get up at 5 a.m. and I write from 5 to 9, and then I wrangle my children to their computers and get them going on homeschooling stuff. So I save all of the sort of social media, administrative kind of things that we do, so many writers do behind the scenes, for the daytime, because I can work on that and be interrupted 500 times. And it doesn't matter as much as that sort of sacred creative space you're trying to be in while you're drafting or editing. So, yeah, so that's what I'm doing now. And I can't quite do it 7 days a week. It's a lot and it's early, but I'm probably doing it about 4 days a week. And then the other 3, you know, if I get a couple of hours in here and there, then I consider it a win. So, but it was a big change. And I don't really have a choice. I have deadlines. And if I want to get paid, then I've got to do my work. It's not, you know, I don't have the option to just sort of, oh, I feel like crap today, I can't get it done. So it's just as well, because honestly, it keeps me from obsessing about the news. You know, I was doing a lot of that initially, and now I've learned to open it once a day, and that's it. I don't need to be locked on all the time. So
how has all of this pandemic news and everything that you're looking at, is it shifting not the way you're creating and your schedule, because as you said you have to, is it shifting the way you're looking at history or what you are going to be writing about? Has it changed that creative lens in any way for you?
You know, I don't think so. I think because as a historical writer, I'm not examining, I do examine what's happening now for sure. And I draw parallels to the past. You know, 100 years ago, we had a pandemic that was like this, and they dealt with it in different ways in different cities. You know, like Philadelphia, it was a nightmare. They rushed and opened everything and didn't stagger things, businesses, etc. And so many people died. And so I'm looking at all of these similarities. But I'm also, you know, I'm always examining disenfranchised women, or women that are sort of overlooked and never given what was due to them. So that happens today too, but the pandemic really has nothing to do with that. Like, that's something that has happened in the past. Although I will say, I've seen articles about how the women behind the scenes are sort of the silent workers that are keeping this thing going, keeping the country going. And that's 100% true. So, but what else is new?
Right?
Right.
You've been covering this for it's been going on for all of history. That's what you write a lot about, is the silent women in the background, you know. Okay, so my mother picked Meet Me in Monaco as her book club book, okay? She's in this book club that's been, hold it up. Okay, she's been in this book club that was founded in the 1800s. It's all women. It's been going on. Yes, a book club like founded in like 1890. It's called Lotus Club, and it's in Hot Springs, Arkansas. It's one of the oldest book clubs in the country.
That is amazing. Wow, I need to write a book about them.
Right? It's sort of interesting. So they are very obsessed with history as well. Like, the whole group is obsessed with history because they feel like they've been a part of it. So I usually don't ask really specific questions about like plots of novels, but I'm going to in this case.
That's great. Go for it. I'm ready.
I'll start with, what drew you to Grace Kelly? Why obsessed with her?
So it's funny, she was actually kind of a happenstance, to be honest, because Hazel and I were talking about, okay, we did a Christmas book and a war book, and we want to do something that is the exact opposite of that. What is the opposite of World War I angsty love story? And we decided a summer book. So I said to her, well, God, I love the south of France. I love the Riviera. I love books set there. I love movies set there. I want to be there. Let's write a book set there. And she said, awesome. And I said, you know, I see sort of those scarves over their heads, and the big sunglasses and the hats and the fancy cars. And she actually shouted out, Grace Kelly, oh my God. And then I just got goosebumps. But then we both were immediately, okay, it's got to be Grace Kelly. So we started kind of digging around and decided that that this would be a bit more romantic than the other stuff we've written. I mean, there's always a thread of love in my books for sure, but that one is distinctly more romantic, I think, than some of the others. I was the boy in Last Christmas in Paris. So this time I was like, I'll be the girl, you can be the boy. So I wrote Sophie and she wrote James. And of course we both edit everything. So honestly, it's truly collaborative. We touch every single page, both of us. So those are just the initial drafting. You know, we each take a character to make sure the voice is really well preserved. And we just were off and running. We saw this stuff about Grace Kelly's wedding, and there's so many details. And then the fact that it was filmed, and there was this ship that everybody crowded on to with party games and whatever for the pre-wedding stuff. I mean, there was just a lot of interesting details around it that are very different for most people, obviously. And so when we found a perfumer who was commissioned, in fact,
so that's real.
It is real. It was not Sophie Duval, who was a woman we made up, but it was Creed was the name of the company, and the perfume itself is Florissimo. And I want to say it's 200 something per ounce. It's very expensive. It's very floral and thick. It was very kind of the times. You know, I don't think it's the kind of scent that people would be as drawn to today, you know, if you smell some of but it's very complex. I got to smell just like a bit on a strip of paper. So, but yeah, it's around, it was real. And so we took that as the inspiration and then created fictional characters around this. The other thing is, this was the first time a wedding was really heavily televised and heavily staged by the press. You know, the press was just pushing in on them. That's right around when all that paparazzi stuff started happening. In fact, yeah, I think that word was invented right around that time. So yeah, it was, it made sense that we could have a photojournalist mixed up in there as well. So, yeah, and then we were off.
So you can still buy the perfume technically if you want to pay $200 an ounce. It's out there.
Yeah, and don't quote that price. I'm not sure of, but I know it was very expensive.
But some sort of high-end perfume. I loved the way you guys described the scents, right? And how each scent took on a different personality. Like it felt very artistic in that way, like someone's artistic choice to choose a scent. How far did you guys go down in the research on the scents and on the perfumes and on what people really did wear and all of that stuff?
So because I had the task of writing Sophie, Hazel definitely did her fair share of research as well, but it was kind of, you know, that the big bulk of that I spent reading a bunch of, believe it or not, diaries written by noses. And a nose is someone who is a professional in the business. And they keep notebooks with all of their, just like Sophie does in the book, with impressions of scents and what they remind them of and things like that. Because it's kind of like, it's being a writer or a painter in a way. You know, you see something as a painter that sparks something else, some kind of imagination, a piece of your imagination, and then you can almost envision a new project. And I think that's how a perfumer works as well. But we both decided, okay, we want to get, you know, elbows deep into this. So we booked a trip to France, and we went and spent time in Nice and Grasse, the perfume capital of the world. And we did a perfume making class at a place called Molinard, which is one of the oldest French perfume factories in the world. And it was so much fun. Our scents were terrible. I mean, they were okay, but it was, you know, there's so much art that goes into it. It's unbelievable. And science, there's so much science. It's really both. So, but it was good fun. It was, you know, we left there with a giant headache and just thought, how does somebody do this all day long? They must have, I think they have rules about how long they could work on something a day in terms of smells. because it would wreck your, I mean, can you imagine? You would stop smelling things. You know how once you're in a room somewhere, you kind of acclimate and you stop smelling things, and you don't want to do that as a perfumer.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was fascinating. We had a lot of fun doing that. We spent a ridiculous amount of money on buying perfume after that, and perfume soap. So I bought it for friends, and I'm like, oh, so-and-so needs a present. Someone I never buy presents for because I just wanted to buy the perfume. But it was fun. It was fun. I like to do that for all my books, honestly. I try really hard to go schedule some kind of trip and go to the location. For The Phantom's Apprentice, I spent a couple of days in the Palais Garnier, which is the Paris Opera House, the old one, where the original Phantom allegedly took place. The building is absolutely exquisite, and I spent days just taking notes and hundreds of photos and doing the tours and that kind of stuff. I try to do that whenever I can because, you know, as a writer yourself, how much you glean from being in a place. You know, there's sort of the essence that you can't capture in a photo or even in reading almost. You kind of have to be there.
Smells and the sounds and just what you said, the atmosphere of being there, it's different than being there. So what are your favorite places in France, since you have done so, you've written so extensively about France? What are your favorite places out of the way, not as quite as common, or what are the places that have really moved you?
So there's a town called Nîmes, and it's in the south of France. It's got one of the most well-preserved Roman amphitheaters in the world. Have you been?
I've heard of it, and I've seen pictures. I've studied the amphitheater in art history classes, is why I'm nodding along. I'm like, oh, right.
Yeah, that's why I saw you nodding, and I thought, oh, she's been. But it's a great little town. It's quaint. It's, you know, it's got the cobbled square, and it has all these amazing Roman ruins everywhere. And there's the aqueduct just outside of town, the Roman aqueduct that they still use today.
Really?
It's totally in working order. It's through beautiful countryside. There's olive trees everywhere. It's a beautiful place.
Okay, but obviously you are a little obsessed with France. So
yeah, although my next few books,
where that came from, like where that connection came from.
So I started kind of picking at it in 7th grade. We had to pick an elective, and I actually signed up for something else. I signed up for speech class because everybody loved the teacher. It was supposed to be an amazing class, and it was full. So I started looking at the other things, and French was literally the only other thing that appealed to me. So I signed up for French, and I was in Louisiana at the time. That's where my dad was stationed there. And then it was completely different French from the French I learned later. But, you know, a lot of the grammar was the same, obviously. But the sounds are very different. So yeah, I started there, and I just kept going.
Kept picking at it.
I just love the sound of the language. I think it's beautiful. I love the way they value beauty in a bunch of different forms. I love the way they want to preserve sort of the simplicity of life in ways that the modern world is fighting against. And I know that Italy and France, and I've never been to Italy, by the way. I know, I have to go. Italy and France, I know, are kind of sister countries in the things that they admire and put on a pedestal, you know, food and art and architecture and beautiful gardens and all these things. Yeah, so.
Okay, one last question though, because you have brought up a couple times sort of art and artistic eyes, and I know a lot of your writing, and even on Twitter, and I know how important Twitter is in life. You know, you describe yourself as art obsessed.
Yes, I am.
And the way you described the perfume, the way you got into her head, to me felt like an artist. Like you said, there was an artistic craft to doing that. So what has being art obsessed or studying the visual arts given you for your writing and your own creative process?
Well, aren't we all inspired by beauty? I mean, I think there's a lot of beauty in many things, and in many skills even. So my husband is a former carpenter, and he makes really beautiful things out of wood. And he hasn't made had time to make furniture or things like that, but he's made a lot of other things. I have a gorgeous tarot box that he hand carved. It's got the entire picture of the Empress with detailed carvings on the front of it. It's gorgeous. I think that I love art because it inspires me on so many levels. It makes me feel connected emotionally to the person who made it. I'm sure it elicits things in me that the artist is trying to elicit in me, even though they didn't maybe they didn't feel that way necessarily at the time, but they're trying to get you to, So how it affects my writing, I don't know. I think being a writer is is being an artist in its own way. And so the thing that we do is we try to get into different heads, and tap into the feelings of different kinds of people, and try them on, put them on, walk around at it, and try to tell a story about them, and connect it to some sort of object or some sort of, story in their life. So yeah, I don't know if that's really an answer. It's such a nebulous thing. I know that one of the things I love to do most when I travel, is to find what museums are in the area, and I'm up for any kind of museum. It's not just painting and sculpture, which are my favorite, but I'm up for anything. I've been to the Sex Museum in New York City because I'm like, what is this? What is this? How is there a sex museum? I'm going. I have to see what this is. And it's that curiosity, I think, that writers possess, especially historical writers. I go looking for things I don't know that much about that I find kind of fascinating and want to learn more about. So
okay, but you have to tell me what the Sex Museum was before we go. You have to at least give me a sentence. What was it?
It's not exactly, it's small, and it sort of follows sex in pop culture. So how it was represented in different drawings, hundreds of years ago, all the way up to how it's portrayed in comics and film. And so it's kind of a multimedia. It's interesting. It's a pop culture museum for sure. And then the bottom floor is a bar, and every one of the drinks is named after some sexual position, of course, which was a hoot. Of course.
That's a great.
I went with girlfriends, just because we're like, this is so tacky. We're going to check it out. But it was actually really interesting. Believe it or not. So
it is nice. This is why I do like being a writer, because it does give us permission to be curious about things.
Yeah. I've been in the Sewer Museum in Paris as well. And that I'm making this face because that's about how it smells.
Well, and all the catacombs under Paris too, and it's all creepy and dead people.
Good to check out these things, though.
Exactly. This is what you do when you're with historical novelists. I guess you go to weird
Stephanie Storey, Story Time virtually. We've got time and plenty of stories, talking stories in a novel way. Story Time with Stephanie Storey.